today's session will actually focus on our own ADB processes and guidelines on promoting CSO cooperation. And towards the end of the day, we're excited about the launch of our NGOC community site, where you can access toolkits, materials, videos on if you want to know more about how to engage civil society in our work. Based on the active breakout group discussions yesterday, I'm sure our energies are still up, but we'd like to heighten everyone's energies further and make the third day of our training the most interactive session yet. Why don't I call my colleague in NGOC, Sam, our communications consultant, to start with some icebreakers first. Sam, over to you.
All right, thanks for that, Rosal. And we're now on the third day of our CWRD training, but I haven't seen the faces of most of you. And I will, you know, remove my face mask for some minutes for our icebreaker. All right, hold on. All right, can you turn on your videos for our short icebreaker? Yep. All right, great. Yeah. So today's a Thursday, right? I'm trying to remember what day it is. Okay. So now, since we're far away from each other, but we don't want this distance to sort of limit us. Why don't we give our virtual highs and hellos to each other? And let's start with why don't we give a virtual high five to the person to your left? To your left. High five to your left. I don't know if we have the same view, but yeah. And give a virtual high five to the person on your right. Hi, Chris. All right. And then say hi to the person above. I don't know who that is. Hi. And to the one below. Hello. All right. And shake it off. All right. Okay. I hope you've got lots of energy for the rest of our session. Thank you.
Okay, that was a very quick and effective energizer. Thank you, Sam. Even though we don't see each
Okay.
other face to face today, at least we got to know how you're doing, how you look today through your own screens. It has become more important now to reach out to colleagues and ask them how they're doing at this time when we have less face to face interaction. And it's very good to see all of you. Okay, that's a good start for our discussion. Our next topic, straight to our next topic, is on the new staff instruction, the complete guide for promoting CSO cooperation in ADB. As you may know, ADB has an NGO cooperation policy as provided in our OME4, and a new SI on CSO cooperation is being crafted, which we aim to have approved soon. And the SI aims to be a complete guide to CSO cooperation and will clarify provisions specifically on procurement of CSO services, building partnerships with them, and measuring CSO engagement in our work. And we have with us a very credible speaker for this topic, Miss Emma Walters. Emma is a former project manager of the International Federation of Journalists. She's also a former deputy director of the University of Sydney, and she's the principal. She has her own consultancy firm, Emma Walters and Associates. And she's an expert on civil society engagement and has done extensive work on this area in the Southeast Asia and the Pacific as trainer, facilitator, researcher, evaluator of development projects. She also, in ADB alone, she has an extensive experience on this subject as well. As facilitator and trainer, she has also produced civil society briefs for the Pacific countries for the NGOC. And currently, she is providing very critical support to the NGOC team in commenting on project documents, and particularly in crafting this new staff instruction on promoting CSO cooperation in the ADB. So without further ado, I turn over the mic to Emma Walters. Emma, over to you.
Well, hi everybody. How are you all going? I can't see you all, but I want you to just, in the vein of Sam's icebreaker, I want you to turn your microphone on and just say hello in whatever language you want. I want to hear some people out there.
Mabuhay.
Hi.
Oh, you're
Hello.
there. Oh, that's so good.
Kumusta?
Yay! Yay! It's so good, isn't it, to actually be able to hear some people. So look, thank you so much for having me here today. As Roselle just explained, I'm going to talk about the new draft, and I need to emphasize draft staff instruction of promotion of engagement with civil society organisations. So the point here is that this is draft and it may well change where it's not finalised yet. This presentation is quite similar to a presentation that I gave a few weeks ago at the CSO Anchors training. I've changed it around a bit. So if you've attended that training, then apologies for the things that are similar, but I've tried to make it a little bit more tailored to this region. I'd like you to jump in and ask questions. We have time for Q&A at the end, but if you have questions throughout, I will try and answer them. But that being said, I'm not a procurement expert. I'm not a contracts expert, so I'll try and answer where I can. I might draw in Lainey as well and other resource people to help. But if I don't know the answer, I'm just going to say I don't know, and I'll go and find out for you. But just to start off, I wanted to show this picture here, which, does anyone know what this picture is from? Where it's from? I mean, imagine there's a group of you that know where it's from, but what project it's from? Anyone? Turn your mics on if you know. Anyone? I think there'll be somebody that might know, but it's from the Northern Flood Damaged Infrastructure Emergency Rehabilitation Project in, anyone got any ideas? In Afghanistan. So the reason that I have this here, yes, Malika, correct. The reason that I have this here is I like the idea that it's a bit of a roadmap, and that's what I'll be doing today. I'll give you a roadmap to the new staff instruction, but also this particular project used the community participation in procurement method to procure and engage CSOs. So I thought that was quite neat. Next slide, please. Okay, the aim of the session is for participants to understand the role of the new staff instruction, which, you know, we are in ADB, so I'll have to use the acronym SI, on business processes for promotion of engagement with CSOs, and to identify in the 15 or 20 minutes that I have the ways that it can assist you in designing and delivering ADB assisted projects with civil society engagement. So we'll look at what the SI is designed to provide instruction on, how the SI is actually structured itself, what that means for your day-to-day work, and what extra information is going to be included in a forthcoming guidance note, because the SI can only do so much, and I'll explain what that is. And a lot of the information on civil society engagement will be included in a guidance note. And that, as Roselle mentioned in the beginning, will be included on the new NGOC's community site. So as she mentioned, it's going to have resources and other items that will help ADB staff with civil society engagement. Next slide, please. So this is all about the staff instruction, but it fits into staff instructions in general fit into a chain of types of documents and guidance material and governance material within ADB. So this little chain looks at where a staff instruction fits in. So if we start on the left-hand side of the screen, the basis is the charter, the ADB charter, the agreement establishing the ADB from 1966. Then the next thing along the chain is policy. And for non-civil society engagement areas, there's policies for those areas, but I'm focusing obviously on civil society engagement. And so the policy that governs this is cooperation between ADB and non-government organisations from 1998. Then there's OME4 that Roselle mentioned in the beginning, and that is being revised currently along with the staff instruction. And then the next thing along in the chain is the staff instruction, which we'll be talking about today. And then further along is technical advice and best practice, and a lot more detailed material, which will be included in a guidance note that should be slated for 2021. Next slide, please. So what is the focus of the staff instruction? It's a management approved instructions about undertaking specific activities in a particular way. It should not extend or alter policy. It elaborates on policy and compliance requirements. It doesn't replicate text in other policies or strategies or OM, operations manual, or SI. So it takes the approach that something can happen. Now go to the relevant other document, the OM or the SI or whatever else it is, to find out how it can happen and under what circumstances. General guidance not related to compliance is excluded and will be included in the guidance note that we've mentioned already. And the staff instruction provides detail on roles and responsibilities. So that's the focus of the staff instruction. Next slide, please. One way that I like to look at it is thinking about a fruit tree, and in this case, an apricot tree. Now, does anyone have any ideas? Microphones on, please. Anyone have any ideas why I would be showing you a fruit tree to talk about the staff instruction? Any ideas? Put something in the chat box, turn your microphone on. I want to hear that there are real people out there. Any ideas why I might be showing you a fruit tree to explain the staff instruction?
The benefit of hard work, and then it pays off.
Oh, I like that. Who was that? I didn't see who's speaking.
This is Shafiq from Afghanistan, Azerbaijan.
Oh, very good. Benefit of hard work. I like that. I'm going to use that the next time I do this presentation. Anyone else got any ideas why I might use an apricot tree? Okay, let's just jump into it. Next slide, please. Okay, so we can think about the staff instruction and the hierarchy across the ADB of various governance and policy areas, looking at the roots as the policy. So that is very much grounded and doesn't change much at all. The trunk is very stable and again doesn't change very much, and think about that as the OM. The branches are very stable, but they provide detail on what can happen, specific instructions on roles and responsibilities and so forth. But the fruit, the juicy stuff, the detail, very specific guidance, best practice, case studies, examples, and so on, the fruit is what we're going to be including in the guidance note. So I like to think of it as a fruit tree, in this case, an apricot tree. So next slide, please. So you'll see there's this beautiful looking apricot that I actually, after doing these slides, had to go to the shop today and buy some apricots. They were making me hungry. This beautiful looking apricot indicates throughout the presentation that more detail, a lot more detail on a particular topic that has the apricot next to it will be included in the guidance note. And so the guidance note, as Roselle mentioned early on, will be included on the newly launched or about to be launched NGOC community site. Next slide, please, Flo. So what parts of the draft SI are relevant to you? I don't know if there's any of these people here in the audience today. Next slide, please. Okay, now I want you to turn your microphones back on, please, if you would. Can you just tell me by a yes or I have, if you have been involved in, first of all, policy formulation or revision? So maybe it might be something to do with the civil society engagement in your resident mission around Strategy 2030 or something else. Has anybody been involved in any policy formulation or revision? Yes. Yes? Anyone else who got one? Okay, that's good for me. Anyone been involved in CPS preparation?
Yes.
Yeah, it's the same person. Anyone else?
Yeah, we've been consulted as well. So
Great.
it
Okay,
can
has
be
anybody?
considered.
Yes, on CPS too. Yes.
Fantastic. Keep saying yes. That's what I want to hear. Has anybody been involved in preparing the part 3, the participation and empowerment section of the IPSA, the initial poverty and social analysis for a project? Anyone? No one? No?
Yes.
Yes, we've got a yes. Anyone else? No. Okay, what about the participation in empowering the poor, part 2 section of the SPRSS? Has anybody been involved in preparing one of those?
Yes.
Yes. Anyone else? That's very... Okay, what about preparing or contributing to a project completion report?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Yes.
A different voice.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, good. Excellent. What about working with CSOs or having some kind of engagement or contact with CSOs at the resident mission?
Yes.
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 Oh, yes. There's lots of yeses there. What about working with CSOs in non-sovereign operations? No, not in this group. What about working with CSOs in FCAS, fragile and conflict affected situations?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes. Ongoing.
Ongoing, yes. And what about, has there been anybody else that's been involved in other forms of civil society engagement that we haven't mentioned?
Yes.
What are they? Who's that saying yes? That?
Other forms, do you mean consultations and
Yeah, well, that's what I'll,
also,
consultations for
also grants, yeah.
grants. Okay, great. All right, so if you've been involved in any of those things, then the SI will have relevance for you. So next slide, please. So this is going to explain how the draft staff instruction is actually structured. So this is what the document looks like as far as major sections is concerned. It largely follows, though not completely, the scheme that's set up in the NGO policy cooperation between the ADB and NGOs. And it starts with scope, which is what all staff instructions do, then definition of CSOs, approaches and depths to participation. Then the bulk of the staff instruction is devoted to the business processes. And as I said before, it follows largely this scheme that's set up in the NGO policy, which is looking at cooperation at a policy level, at a country level, at a project level. And then it looks at procurement of CSOs, partnerships with CSOs, and then other ways to engage civil society. But at that project level, the third bullet point down in the business processes, it looks at that throughout the project cycle, and we'll get to that in a moment. So next slide, please. What the SI and the revision in the OM seeks to do is look for a consistent definition of CSOs. So we move from the terminology of non-government organisations or NGOs to civil society organisations. And it talks about them not being based in government and not being created to earn a profit. And then it gives this consistent definition across the documentation, across the OM, across the civil society indicator in the corporate results framework, and most importantly for today in the draft staff instruction. And the definition is there. I won't read it out. You can read it, but it is a consistent definition. Next slide, please. So this mirrors some work that we have done previously that's on the Development Asia site that's drawn from the work that Civicus does, which is seeing NGOs as a subset of broader civil society. But I wanted to say that with the definition of CSOs, when the NGOC put the first iteration of the staff instruction out, we got a whole range of additional types of organisations that people wanted included in the definition, such as disabled people's organisations, organisations dealing with gender-based violence, sexual and gender identity groups, caste-based groups and others. Now that detail on all the different types of civil society organisations will be included on the in the guidance note in the NGO community site. So then let's go to the next slide, please. As I said, it will be included in the guidance note. Next slide, please. So let's just go through then these sections briefly. There's a section on preparing and reviewing a policy with civil society engagement, and it talks about the requirement to seek input on major policy and strategy papers as relevant, and that the NGOC can assist with consultations of these sorts of policy engagement. Then it talks about, this is section D2 in the new draft staff instruction, preparing the CPS, and that country consultations should be undertaken, and that as needed, CSO should be consulted throughout the CPS, and that their stakeholders and relevant documents should be shared with civil society for input as they are available, and for consultations about the draft CPS copies to be made available in advance to in-country stakeholders. Next slide, please. Then this next section is looking at through the project cycle. So we start with project processing, and a lot of the detail on this will be included in the forthcoming guidance note. So we look at civil society organisation, the role of civil society in project processing. So it's particularly looking at that sort of desk-based work that is done. So it's around the DMF preparation and the various entry points for civil society engagement in the participatory DMF. It also focuses on the work that project officers need to do around completing section 3 of the IPSA, and it describes, that section describes the key features, responsibilities and resources required to strengthen the participation of CSOs and or of the poor and vulnerable. Then we move to the next part of the SI is around designing a project that incorporates civil society engagement. That gives quite a bit of detail. So it talks about the roles for civil society organisations in implementing projects, though note the apricot. So a lot of that detail, the specific detail on the different types of roles that CSOs can play in implementing projects, that will be in the guidance note. It talks about the SPRSS and the requirement to articulate planned CSO engagement during project implementation, if any. And the SPRSS, Lainey will talk a little bit more about this in her session following this, is very important for planning CSO engagement, but then also when after a project is completed, going back to the SPRSS and reporting in the PCR whether that planned meaningful CSO engagement, if it was in the SPRSS, has actually occurred throughout the project, and making sure that that's reported in the PCR. And it also talks about how CSOs can be engaged in knowledge and support technical assistance in various ways. A lot of this information, you'll see lots of apricots will be included in the apricot coloured guidance note. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, I'm not going to spend much on this because this is what Lainey will be talking about in her presentation. But as I mentioned a moment ago, the PCR needs to outline what planned civil society engagement actually took place. There's also a staff instruction talks about the different ways that civil society itself can be involved in monitoring and evaluating ADB financed operations. Next slide, please. Again, I won't spend much time on this, but I mentioned already that we look at what is in the SPRSS, was there planned meaningful civil society engagement, and then we come back to it when the project completion report is prepared as draft, and we look and see what was planned in the SPRSS, did it actually occur? The staff instruction describes this process. Next slide, please. And again, we use the idea of planned meaningful civil society engagement. We use the strengthening participation for development results guide to participation to indicate for us whether or not the civil society engagement that was planned was actually meaningful, and that is a requirement to indicate in the SPRSS whether the different levels at different approaches to participation, which are on the left-hand column there. I won't spend time on this because Lainey will be talking about it in her session. Next slide, please. The next section of the draft SI talks about procurement of CSOs, and it talks about a whole range of different aspects of procurement. So publicising business opportunities to CSOs to make sure that they know that there are opportunities available. It talks about CSOs providing non-consulting services, providing consulting services, and the different types of procurement methods that can be modified. So modified QCBS can be used for CSOs. Direct contracting isn't modified, but it can be used for civil society engagement. I've already mentioned community participation in procurement. The staff instruction talks about framework agreements. It also talks about the benefits of output-based contracts in terms of reference, lump sum or output-based, which may be more beneficial when engaging with CSOs. It talks about different ways of engaging small CSOs, and it talks about working with CSOs in FCAS. Next slide, please. Then there are other sections. So there's one on partnerships with CSOs, and this just really highlights the different types of partnerships. So development partnerships, which can be ADB wide or specific, affiliations with CSOs, and particularly networks of CSOs, and CSOs as co-financiers. And we need to remember that a lot of the foundations are civil society organisations. And then the next slide, please. The last section is section D6 in the SI, and it talks about other ways to engage with CSOs. And a few of you mentioned that you've engaged with CSOs through the resident missions and representative offices. So we talk about roles and responsibilities there. We talk about the SI talks about pilot activities, non-sovereign operations, good governance, accountability, anti-corruption and transparency, access to information. And then lastly, the staff instruction talks about engagement with advocacy organisations. But you can see a big apricot there. That means that all these topics are touched lightly on in the staff instruction and will be touched on in a lot more detail in the guidance note. So that's an introduction to the draft staff instruction. Are there any questions?
May I have a question, please?
Yes, of course. You may.
I'm not sure if it's relevant here or I can ask it later. On the difference of the engagement CSOs and the consulting companies, right?
Yes.
So what is the benefit of having CSOs rather than consulting company? What is the difference? I mean, at that point, because normally while talking to CSOs or NGOs, they also want to be engaged and paid for this. So it makes them as a normal consulting company. So then meaning they have to compete, right? As other companies following our consulting services and procurement, all our guidelines. So I'm a bit wondering how to differentiate, just to understand the benefits of working with CSOs rather than consulting companies,
So
right?
there's two parts
They're
of your
engaged,
question.
yes,
Sorry,
if
go
they're
ahead.
engaged, pay on a paid basis, right?
Yeah, so there's two parts of your question. What's the benefit of working with CSOs, and how do we do that in a procurement sense? So as far as the benefit of working with CSOs is, it really comes down to that slide that I showed early on, which is around the definitions of CSOs. And the key difference between CSOs and consulting firms is that CSOs have very clear, most of the time, not always, CSOs have very clear links to communities. So when we want to do, and they might be advocacy organizations, so they might advocate for a community, they might be member-based organizations, so they may have community members as members of the CSO, or they might provide services to communities. And so the benefits of working with CSOs, it's not just limited to community engagement. One of the key ones is that they have these very clear links to communities, so they can help with a range of different activities that require community engagement. And that might be helping facilitate consultations, it might be outreach, it might be educational capacity building, say around hand washing campaigns, it might be there's a whole, this is the detail that will be included in the guidance note. There's a swathe of areas that CSOs provide those community links to communities that I think most consulting firms wouldn't be able to necessarily replicate. So that's the benefits, why project officers sometimes seek out civil society organisations to be included in projects. As far as procurement, this is a perennial question, and the staff instruction, when it's finalised, does give guidance around what are the different circumstances that you, or what are the different times that you can treat CSOs a little bit differently. And as I said at the beginning, I'm not a procurement expert, so I don't want to give a lot of detail on that, because it needs to obviously be cleared by PPFD. So, but suffice to say, there is detail in the draft staff instruction around when to treat CSOs a little bit differently to consulting firms. But the majority of the time, we treat them the same as consulting firms. And sometimes it is useful to think about different ways beyond consulting services to engage with CSOs. And that's what the staff instruction points you towards.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your answer. My next point is, normally when we talked with CSOs and then when they were interested to work in ADB project, and we were referring them to our CMS system, to some, so they say, oh no, this is like for consulting companies, we are not. So they want more easier, track to go there, like a fast track to get it, just on the basis that they're CSOs, so they're advocating and blah blah blah. That's why if there will be very clear instructions here with the showing all the benefits, etc., just to help both the government to understand what is the benefit working with CSOs, or what is the benefit for CSOs to work for ADB project, but engaged as a consulting company if they want to get paid. It will be very helpful, because when government is borrowing money from ADB, this is the I'm talking about the countries where we get loans, not the grants, right? So to spend money for some services for CSO service and pay, etc., etc. Sometimes it's very difficult to convince them why we are doing that. Just like to connect with community, we have like a local government like mahallas in Uzbekistan case who works with the community, and they can do it through that chain. Yes, that's why there will be some instructions to show all this detailed and information to convince them and to explain both CSOs and the government. It will be very helpful.
So the staff instruction, frankly, isn't going to provide that, because it's based on policy. It's where we'll get the great detail, and the convincing factor that you're asking about is in the guidance note. But just on the points that you raised, I mean, I know that there are community development councils in some countries in this region, and we regard those as civil society organizations. So we don't always need to, we need to keep our minds broad as far as what is civil society. And one of the things that the staff instruction will help on, and the guidance note, is that. So we need to think about civil society is not just NGOs. It's not just that sort of very rigid view of non-government organisations. It includes, for example, chambers of commerce, so and business associations. So potentially the transport associations and textile associations. It includes trade unions. It includes mass people's organisations. So the civil society, when we talk about civil society, we're not just talking about those what's traditionally known as in some parts of the world as non-government organisations. We've got a broader view, and that is relevant when answering that question that you were just asking. But I do understand your point about sometimes needing to convince the government that this is a useful thing to do, and that sort of information is not going to be in the SI, because the SI is not a promotional document, but there'll be case studies and technical support and advice for those sorts of issues in the guidance note. I can take one more question, then we need to go to the next session. I need one of those countdown clocks. Okay, have we got any more questions? All right, well, thank you very much. I'd like to thank Roselle for inviting me to come and speak, and hand back so she can introduce the next speaker.
Thank you, Lainey. Thank you very sorry, Emma. Thank you very much for the discussion. It's just a very quick, but there's a lot of points actually we can raise about the new SI. But please, we encourage the participants to keep the questions going. If you still have questions, you just type them down in our chat box, and even after the end of even after we've closed our training, we can continue our conversations about your questions about the SI, and we'll post them on at our community site so we can continue our conversations. But right now we will go to our next session on measuring the depths of ADB's cooperation with civil society. As you may know, starting in this year, 2020, ADB measures depths of civil society engagement by capturing in our documents if planned high-level meaningful engagement in SPRSS is actually delivered and reported in the project completion reports. So this session is a review on how CSO participation is documented in IPSA and SPRSS, introduced earlier already by Emma, and how it is captured in the new indicator guide for measuring the extent of ADB's cooperation with CSOs. In this session, you will get the chance to review sample cases of how CSE or civil society engagement are reported in these documents, and perhaps provide comments and recommendations on how to improve them. So our resource person for this topic needs no further introduction. You know her very well. We will have Lainey Thomas to talk about this. She has been a pillar of the NGOC and she's been with the ADB since 2009, supporting the work of NGOC in strengthening collaborations between ADB, government, and civil society. She has also managed ADB projects in Southeast Asia on education, health, and social protection. So she's familiar with all these processes. Prior to ADB, she had extensive work also working with large and small CSOs, national and international, in Africa and Southeast Asia, where she gained grassroots perspectives of development. So please welcome Lainey Thomas. Over to you, Lainey.
Thank you, Roselle. Except I think you, in your introduction, you missed my experience in Central West. I lived for 3 years in the Southern Caucasus. And so it's a part of the world very close to my heart, and makes me particularly excited to present today to this audience and to talk about how civil society engagement in Central West can be more meaningful and really add more value to the ADB portfolio in Central West. So anyway, thank you very much for the introduction. It's really nice to see such a great turnout. And I only have a few slides. I'm going to talk about the CW portfolio. As with Emma, I also talked during the original training for all the NGO anchors about our work and how we're documenting civil society engagement. But here I want to talk a little bit more about the projects that we have and how the NGOC is reviewing the CW portfolio. So if you go to the next slide, that just provides a background about what I'm talking about. Roselle has covered most of this. I want to talk to you a little bit about how we're measuring civil society engagement. And just to recap, I'm not sure how many people remember how we have been measuring civil society engagement, but since 2000, since 1990, I found reports that report on ADB's engagement with civil society. And in 2000, the NGOC was established, and that's where it became formalized in a through the annual report of the NGOC as well, where we provide more detail and analysis about that civil society engagement. But ADB took a page from the World Bank's playbook and said, let's look and see in the project documents if it says we're going to have civil society engagement. And if the project does, then we'll consider that as having civil society engagement, and we'll add those projects up and we'll divide those over the total number that we're approving in a year, and that'll be the percentage of our portfolio with civil society engagement. So for years, ADB has reported in the 90s. In 2016, we reported 100% of ADB's projects that were approved that year that had civil society engagement. So you don't need to be a civil society specialist to figure out something's not right there. Putting a description about civil society engagement in the SPRSS is not proof that civil society engagement has taken place in the project. So let's talk through what we're going to do now, how we're going to measure it, and then let's look at this Central West portfolio. So next slide, please. So first of all, I just want to recap. Emma's shown you this, but I want to make sure you're super clear. So let's go to the next slide so we can see about the depths of participation. Emma showed you the page from page 3 of the Strengthening Development for Participation Results Handbook, and I'm showing it to you in a flashy new graphic that we've been testing out for the draft staff instruction. So here you can see the 6 different parts under project implementation with a star are those that we define as having high level civil society participation. So I'll just take one example where we can look at collaboration, where it says significant stakeholder, sorry, I need to make it a little bit bigger, significant stakeholder influence on project design, body, and agreement. So that means that at the collaboration level, anything, I'm sorry, I've missed more stars. There should be stars all across the collaboration level. But any of those types of activities that are planned in the project and then that are carried out qualify as high level civil society engagement. So again, as Emma's already covered this, we'll just move straight on to the next slide, even though that is a beautiful graphic, Sam. And let's look at the SPRSS. I think we'll have to zoom out a little bit for this. So this, I was listening listening carefully when Emma asked how many people in the training right now have helped prepare the SPRSS, which is the Summary, Poverty Reduction and Social Strategy. So this document, as you know, it's required for all of our projects, and the project officer's team prepares this analysis. Usually there'll be a social development specialist who's on the consulting team who prepares it, and then ADB staff will check it to make sure that it's filled out completely. But now the NGOC, led by our staff consultant, Emma, looks very, very carefully at question number 4. So if you're involved in civil society engagement at all, and you have a chance to review this part of a project document, you'll know that this is exactly what we're looking at also. And this question number 4 that's highlighted, as you can see, has 4 different levels, and those mirror the ones that we saw in the last slide, right? You remember seeing the information sharing and gathering and sharing, the consultation, collaboration, and partnership, right? And any activity in those last 2 rows of collaboration and partnership would then trigger this. It's just like the classification for gender. Our high level classification is triggered if there's an H under information gathering and sharing, or an H against consultation, or anything except N for, or NA for not applicable, for collaboration and partnership. So we look at that, but before we look at that and say, okay, yes, this project counts, or no, this project doesn't count, we review what that rating is and how you've justified it. We go back through other project documents, other linked documents, the DMF, RRP text, and we see if that matches this rating right here. And if not, we're going to give you feedback and say, hey, we think you should scale this up, or we think you should downgrade this and reconsider your rating so that it matches. Or we may say the text may need to be changed to reflect the rating that you've given. So in any case, we look really carefully at this, and this is how we decide if your project is going to go into our pot of projects that we're going to measure, or if it's going to be projects that aren't measured. So right now, that just brings me to the first difference between our old indicator and our new indicator. As I mentioned before, in the past, we just looked at all the projects to see if there was some kind of civil society engagement. Regardless of what kind of project it was, what sector, what modality, we looked at it. Now, we still review all project documents, but we're only looking at the projects that trigger this high level civil society engagement. So those are the ones that we're going to look at and we're going to review for our indicator. So that now takes me to the next slide, which is the Central West portfolio for PCRs in 2020. So this list here of 18 projects from the CW portfolio comes from a memo that the regional departments prepare and submit to PPFD every year that lists which PCRs they plan to circulate that year. So now that we're in December, we've got the advantage of hindsight, and we know that this may not mirror what actually was delivered. But earlier in the year, this is what Central West said. So you may see some projects here that you've worked on or that you're familiar with. And like I said, this is a list that was on that memo sent to PPFD earlier this year that has projects with civil society engagement. So among these, first thing I want you to do, well, I'll talk you through the table. You can see there's the country from where the project is from, the project's name, project officer, all super self-explanatory. But now we get to the column called What SPRSS Says. So this is the column where we look and see what you've put as project officer, and according to your rating, does that trigger our high-level civil society engagement? So I don't want you to go in too close because, Sam, there's also the key below. I can talk you through it. So OT means old template. A lot of the projects that are having PCRs this year were prepared using a different template. And back when a lot of these projects were prepared, there wasn't a box to tick for the different depths of participation. So that means that the NGOC needs to go through the project documents and do that assessment ourselves. And you can see in the next column, it says what the narrative says. And actually, this is just a little teeny summary. I just put a snippet here so it would fit on one slide, but we have pasted segments of project documents here and have a lot of detail about what your narrative says about civil society engagement. So in, for example, the first project, the project officer originally said, yes, this project has information sharing. So in the old template, has information sharing, consultation, and collaborative decision-making. So in our case, because collaborative decision-making was ticked, that would trigger the NGOC putting this project into the yes, we need to track this project and look at the PCR. However, the NGOC did a review of this project, and it's our belief that that's not the correct rating. So I just have this summary note here, but like I said, I have more detailed documents in the master spreadsheet that says that the narrative doesn't match these ratings. It doesn't justify it. So then in the next column, we can see the NGOC says, nope, doesn't count. So that project, we're not going to look at the PCR and identify to see if it is in fact, if it has delivered on its civil society engagement. Now, let's look at a project that has the opposite situation. If we can look at the Azerbaijan Road Network Development Project. Can you go back, please? Thank you. So the project number 6, projects 4 and 5, Road Network Development Program, tranches 3 and 4, tranches 1 and 3. It uses the old template. There's no boxes to select. So we had to go in and identify, is this project one with high level civil society engagement or not? We found in the Gender Action Plan that there's 2 different situations where the project intends to hire an NGO to provide some kind of training during project implementation. So therefore, we identified that this is triggered as, yes, a project that's planning to have high-level civil society engagement. And so NGO says yes. So this is an MFF. There's 2 different tranches, but both of them are meant to deliver this kind of training. And so we'll be reading both PCRs to see if that was in fact delivered. The rest of the examples, I think, are fairly self-explanatory. They're either that same example where they planned it and it wasn't there, or the opposite, it wasn't selected and we did find it. In example number 7, the Kyrgyz Women's Entrepreneurship Development Project, this project had consultation and information sharing, but we didn't know if that was a high level. So we had to go through and read the documents, and in the grants, the grant report, we saw that there is planned supporting organized women's groups. Therefore, we put that as a 1. At the bottom, projects number 16 and 17, those are the 2 in the CW portfolio where we felt that the SPRSS actually indicated a high level of civil society engagement, and that matched what was in the project documents. And so, yes, we should flag that. So as a result, you can see the 6 projects that the NGOC is tracking from Central West among the originally scheduled projects planned for PCR circulation in 2020. Now, note we've got another section of this master spreadsheet that has some other CWRD PCR, draft PCRs that were circulated that we reviewed, but I'm not including those here because I just used the benchmark of the projects that were included in the original memo to PPFD. So as you can see, there's 6 projects that we're looking for. These 6 projects are the only ones from the CWRD 2020 portfolio that we're going to look at from this group. And so our indicator is now going to compare these 6 projects. So let's go on to the next slide. So super straightforward. To calculate CWRD's 2020 indicator for civil society engagement, we're going to research the 6 PCRs from those projects, if they were in fact circulated to the board this year, and we're going to say how many of them that had the planned meaningful CSO engagement, those 6, reported that it took place in the PCR. So we'll now look at the PCR for these 6 projects and compare it to what was planned. I saw an example of hygiene training that was planned, that under the gender action plan, that there was training. There was also a road safety component that was planned. Did that take place? If it did, there's going to be a tick, and CWRD will be on its way to 100% civil society engagement, I hope. So let's now talk about 2021. So moving forward, what are the key takeaways that I want you to have? Okay, the first thing I want you to do is I want you to provide advice and think about what CSO engagement is needed to help deliver the project results. What do we need? In some cases, we're going to use commercial firms and it's not going to add specific value to the project. Maybe it's because of the types of CSOs available. Maybe it's because of the portfolio or the modalities. So identify where there's a good match for civil society engagement in your portfolio. The second is document it clearly. And if I can put a plug in for the NGOC community site, which we're going to be launching shortly, I want to remind you that there'll be additional resources there. We're also going to put in there that we don't have yet, but we're going to have terms of reference for consultants who can do the civil society assessment for those section of the SPRSS, to do work with civil society organizations, to plan their participation and document it in the project documents. Monitoring it. So we're going to put some sample BTORs from review missions that document CSO engagement activities. So is what's planned being documented in BTORs, and is it in the aid memoir where the government is not following through with the intended activities on CSO engagement? Sometimes change happens. Let's document it though, so it's clear what happened and why, and that'll help the NGOC understand how to better support CW in terms of providing civil society engagement in a meaningful way. Okay, and then the last thing is report it in the PCR. So if you're involved in a PCR, remember NGOC is going to want to know, did you report on the planned high-level civil society engagement? Maybe your project will be one of the 12 that doesn't have the planned meaningful CSO engagement, but if it's one of the 6, then make sure that that's there. We're hoping to have lots of examples of this, again, on the community site, but we're also here to help you to review your drafts and provide inputs and advice to you. So with that, I'll close and open it up for questions. So maybe we can, yep, perfect. Stop sharing the screen and let me know who has a question on documenting civil society engagement in CW.
Questions? You can turn on your mic if you wish to have your ask Lainey on
Or you
how.
can type something in the chat box.
Yeah.
Do we have somebody from Azerbaijan, from AZRM, who can talk to us about the women's, the NGO providing training in the 2 projects that have closed? I'd be interested to hear how that's, how that went. Okay, how about from Uzbekistan? I know we have a lot of URM participants. Anybody who's familiar with the Water Supply and Sanitation Service Investment Program?
Hi, Lainey. We are 3 from URM, Farida, Firuza, and myself. Farida is in charge of education and health projects. Firuza is in charge of safeguard dimensions of the project, and I'm a gender specialist. So on behalf of our Uzbek group, I would like to thank you for the very good and detailed presentation and explanation on how to report and how to include the CSO engagement in the project documents, especially in SPRSS. And I do hope that starting from last year, in our Uzbek portfolio, we will have at least 3 projects with a very meaningful CSO engagement. And it was done under your TA in different sectors, road sector, water supply, and also livestock. So I think that these 3 projects could be very good examples of better CSO engagement, because we have hired 3 local NGOs to implement some project components. Just maybe on another note, I would like, as a gender specialist, to share some thoughts on how better do this at the real work in the practical way in the ground. So what helps a lot to us, to gender specialists, to have something in the loan agreement, and I have raised this during our CSO anchors training. Having one para in the loan agreement on gender action plans implementation makes us very confident that the borrowers shall do this. So my proposal would be maybe to consider something for CSO engagement in the loan agreements. Otherwise, it could be just ticking the box exercise. And as you said, the main results could be seen only at the PCR stage. So it's something like comparison between the planned activities and the implemented activities. And for the PCR, what is important, I would suggest to think how to reflect our CSO engagement in the DMF better. So it also helps a lot, and this is just for consideration. Thank you. Over.
Thanks, Mekri. And indeed, I know we've highlighted a few of the projects during this training. Mekri is talking about TA support that ADB, the NGOC, is providing to URM to support civil society engagement. And it's a really fantastic opportunity to look at the different ways and the different types of organizations. We're working, for example, with BWA, the Business Women's Association, which has a presence all across Uzbekistan, especially in some very, very rural areas where they have a higher presence even than some government offices, and some others that are more localized. And through that, we've been able to apply civil society engagement in a lot of different ways and see where it's adding values and where it's adding value to the project and how we can do it better in the future. And you're right about the civil society engagement when it takes place under the gender action plan and you put it in the loan agreement. I've seen it before in the loan agreement and project documents from other departments. So I know that in some project officers do put that in the loan agreement, but that's a fantastic way to make sure that it's documented clearly in the projects, and that way it'll clearly be reported on and be carried over to the PCR. So great point. Thank you very much for that, Mekri, and for sharing your experience. I look forward to our collaboration in 2021 as well.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. So anybody else have a question on any of the other projects, or how we looked at the CW 2020 portfolio for PCRs, or how we're going to be measuring civil society engagement next year? Roselle, I think it's time for me to hand back to you. Just a reminder that, oh, Mekri, are you back on? in any case, the NGOC is available to provide technical advice, document review, and the like to help you make sure that your projects with civil society engagement are effective and working well for you. So we look forward to working with you all in 2021, and please don't hesitate to reach out if you've got questions. So Roselle, back over to you now.
Thank you, Lainey. So that's a very concise discussion on how we are capturing civil society engagements in our documents and the way it has changed now in 2020. Okay, great. So are in we have enough time to perhaps at this stage, I'd like to sort of synthesize what we have been discussing since day one, no, about civil society engagement. And I'd like to, yesterday I introduced to you the emergent learning approach. And I'm trying to use this as our framework for summarizing our takeaways from the last 3 days for this session. So you may recall that, as I mentioned, this approach we start with establishing our ground truths. What are the realities? What are the data that we have on the ground that where we can pick up lessons from? And then what are our insights from those experiences and the data that we have? We call out, we extract the lessons from those, and then we translate the lessons into a theory of success or hypothesis. um, we frame it as, if I do this, what is the result, something like that, and then find opportunities to apply new theory to our action, and so how to improve on the steps that we have been doing already. So I can we show them the shared document? Because I'd like this session to be interactive. And then I'd like to pick up your brains in as we summarize our lessons from today's session. Can we? I think you can have access to the document, to the EL maps through this link, right, Sam? Okay. So where is the? I cannot see it on screen. Can we see it on screen as well? And okay. So this is how our EL map looks like. Um, okay, you can see that you have, we picked this up now from your discussions, from your inputs during our breakouts, and the feedback that we receive also from our guests from civil society, their recommendations. So we plug them all in. Can we start with the ground truths first? Can we look at that quadrant? Okay, so sorry, my screen is very small. I couldn't read it much. But you have access to that document through that link. And in fact, you can type in, you can add if we missed anything from our discussions since the day one of our session. So what are the realities on the ground that we have seen, and what has been working from what we're already doing in terms of civil society engagement? We recall that our question, that the question that we're trying to answer is that, what will it take for us to improve the involvement of civil society in our work? And this is what you said was working in your based on your own experiences in your projects and in your portfolios. So we see that these are the characteristics of CSOs we work with. They are reliable, able to gather independent quantitative and qualitative data. They are trusted by communities. They are familiar with local context. So it may do as well if we work with them. They can be engaged strategically and at the policy level and even through the country partnership strategies. So policy level and even at the projects level, there are a lot of ongoing wide-ranging roles of CSOs at project level. Um, yeah, you've been doing this. You've been doing all this, and especially even in a special context that that CWRD is in. Many of the CSOs that we work with, they started from doing emergency and humanitarian response, and because of the conflict, but now they are also expanding into conflict resolution, peace building, human rights protection, policy engagement. We have initial work from the breakout sessions discussion from the breakout sessions yesterday. There are initial work on tapping CSOs already for third-party monitoring of ADB funded projects and even supporting women entrepreneurs in even in FCAS countries. Um, some of our CSO partners appreciated the flexibility that we provided because of the COVID to adjust contract agreements and partnership arrangements, and even donors are doing that because of the pandemic. And even grassroots organizations are starting to be comfortable with the use of digital technology, and it is a opportunity for us to use technology to reach wider groups of CSOs for our consultations and training. And we are currently reviewing our FCAS strategy and approaches. But of course, we cannot deny that there are challenges. But you will notice that our list for the opportunities are longer than challenges, right? So I was also quite surprised. I was concerned that our discussions will focus on the challenges, but you can see that we have seen even in a greater in a more challenging context of conflict and pandemic, we have seen a lot of uh, good practices in terms of civil society engagement. But of course, we are aware that there are these challenges, context of fragility and conflict, pandemic. It was mentioned in during day one of our session that it has wide-ranging impacts, not only for health, but also on economic, political, and social aspects, and it has impacted CSOs, especially smaller organizations. Um, we have also mentioned that CSO government relations are not always easy. Um, and sometimes there's low capacity, even both for government and CSOs, particularly grassroots. But we mentioned that uh, uh, low capacity is in mostly in terms of resources, no? Lack of resources for smaller organizations to run their mission and to run their programs. But in terms of context, understanding the local context and technical capacities, we can always the grassroots organizations always have that role to support the work of ADB. And for others, for some groups, shifting to online mode of working is also challenging, because there needs to be assured internet connectivity and technological literacy. Okay. You mentioned also, someone from the group also mentioned about difficulty in complying with CMS requirements of ADB. But let's go up, but you will see that our list for the opportunity, what works is longer. And then these are the insights. This is how we picked up your um, thoughts, your insights on this discussion. Definitely, you can always add to this if we're missing anything. Um, it helped that that some of you have done concrete uh, have done capacity assessment, and the concrete products or outputs of that is a CSO database. And in the bigger NGO anchors training, several of them already have advisory groups, and this has become a resource group for the RMs to consult CSOs on different types of work and on various levels, grassroots, national, um, Then you also we learned that there's a value in CSO networking, and perhaps we can start with reaching out to networks and umbrella organizations of CSOs. Okay, at part of our ground truths, we said there's challenge between government and CSO relations, but we've also seen examples of how this can be nurtured, and the role that ADB can play in providing that opportunity for dialogue between government and non-government. Through an example we heard from Georgie is on the OGP, supporting the work of the Open Government Partnership and allowing that dialogue to happen between government and civil society. And it helped that ADB did some pilot projects with CSOs that facilitated such dialogue and improving the relations of government and CSOs. We also picked up that perspectives of CSOs on ADB varies. Some welcome ADB while others see it as a one-way relationship. But perhaps a suggestion is for us to have a closer coordination and frame our messages better uh, to expand so that the CSOs will understand what we can do, what we can offer. It was also cited, this one we picked up from our day one session, that transparency and openness should not be compromised even at this time of pandemic. People should be more informed and engaged now so that government strategy will be more responsive to the people's needs. And that there's realization that CSOs can contribute greatly. Uh, at the lower quadrant in our ground truths, we said the pandemic has uh, contributed challenges. But here, our insight is that many CSOs have continued to thrive and continue to work on these areas, on many areas, and have worked with government to respond to the pandemic as well. Okay, the quadrant on the upper right, upper right. uh, is our hypothesis. So I'd like to get your inputs on this as well, uh, um, to discuss on what we can do, picking up on the insights. How can we translate those insights into something that into an action that we can apply? Perhaps we can frame it this way: if I do this, it will lead to uh, unexpected output or better development results, because that's how we frame our civil society engagement. It's not just engagement for engagement's sake, but because we know and we see that it leads to better development results or leads to better project results. It leads to us reaching our target outputs in our projects. An example from the insights that we picked up is this one: if I invest on capacity assessment of CSOs, I'll be able to develop a CSO database and CSO advisory group that I can consult with on CPS and project matters. So that's just an example. I'm not sure if I framed that correctly from the points that we've picked up from your discussions on the left side of the diagram. Uh, do you want to add on any of these hypotheses? This is part of our application already on what we pick up from the past 3 days. Uh, what can we do? And our framing question is, what does it take? What does it take to improve or to strengthen or to deepen ADB's relations or engagement with civil society? Okay. Do you have thoughts on how we can do that? And or you can also you can turn on your mic and plug in or type in your thoughts in the chat box, so we can add more of these sort of application of what we've picked up.
May I have a suggestion, please,
Yes,
Raza?
please. Okay.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
Mekri on the phone? Yes. Sorry, on the mic.
Based on my experience with CSOs, what would be helpful for us to have more different guidance or materials in our local languages?
Correct.
Because, you know, whenever you are talking to our people, it's a little bit difficult and challenging to use English, and it's quite difficult. Another suggestion would be to have more video materials.
Mm.
It works well with NGOs and CSO. They have better understanding on and visualization on this NGOC material. This is my two suggestions so far.
Thank you, Mekri. Actually, it picks up on this insight on improving our messaging to CSO partners. Any other thoughts? Yeah. Uh, Anyway, we only have 8 minutes before we close the session. But I would suggest that you use this tool perhaps as an assignment, no? As a homework. You try as an anchor, as a CSO anchor in your resident mission, and as a project officer. What have you picked up from this discussion? And what can you translate as your hypothesis so that it responds to our question of on how we can improve CSO relation, our relations with civil society, and contribute to our development results and target outputs. And very quickly, at the lower right corner of the uh, matrix of the diagram, I'd also like to, this can be a homework as well. I'd also like you to think about opportunities. Um, this is actually action planning stage already, but sometimes we need we're very good at planning actually. We're very good at planning, and of course we need some time to brainstorm, and we don't have that the luxury of time today to do that brainstorming, but I'll give this to you as an assignment. But think of opportunities in the next 6 months where you can apply or test your new theories. All right, so at the upper right corner of our diagram or of process, you will think of hypothesis. You will and then you'll think of hypothesis to respond to this question. What can I do to improve CSO, to contribute to improving CSO involvement in ADB portfolio and projects, and what's in my horizon in terms of the opportunities at the lower right of the matrix. What is in my horizon in the next 6 months? What is in my calendar in the next 6 months where I can test that hypothesis? And we'd like you to give us feedback on that if you have applied that, if you've tested your theory. Find some opportunities to test your theory or test your idea, test your plan in the next 6 months. We don't want it to be a very big plan, so that's why we'd like to start with very practical actions or very practical steps for us to contribute to improving civil society engagement in our work. So I leave that two questions for you as your assignment, and please send us feedback. Uh, we'll monitor that. We'll monitor that perhaps monthly or more regularly through the community site. We can continue our discussions there. Okay, we've been talking about the community site. We'd like to take this opportunity to introduce to you the community site so that we can continue our discussions there. Okay, so I'd like to turn the floor to my colleague, our knowledge management consultant, Glo Guevara, to talk to you more about our NGOC community site. Take it away, Glo.
Hi, everyone. Let me just quickly share my screen. Awesome. So I'm excited and stoked to share with you guys the current NGOC community site, which is now live on SharePoint. Allow me to share the link for everyone's reference. Okay, there you go. So the key purpose of the NGO community site is for it to be an updated repository of, as Lainey mentioned, all these templates, these examples, but also some of the knowledge products, outputs, and documents that will be helpful for you when thinking about your project and how you can integrate civil society participation in that. Here as well are some quick links and guides and videos as well for the e-learning course, which has been put together as an intuitive guide for you to be able to put your civil society participation plans together and all these other kind of ways to strengthen your CSO engagement in your projects. We've also divided the community site into two sections. One is, of course, for civil society engagement and participation. And below as well is for meaningful youth engagement, which includes some of the work that we've been doing with youth organizations through our youth initiative or Youth for Asia. Of course, this is a work in progress, but we are launching this officially at this event. And we are also taking some of your comments or some of the things that you feel like would be useful to see on the community site as it is now. And we'll be taking those comments into consideration, and hopefully we'll be able to work towards a landing page that is helpful and intuitive for all that will be using it. But in the meantime, the link is in the chat box. Feel free to visit this, and I think in the evaluation form for this event, there'll be a space for you to share your thoughts and insights. But for now, this is our NGOC community site. Thanks, Giselle.
Thank you, Glo. Yeah, so we value your feedback. So please check it out, the NGOC community site, and we appreciate any feedback that you. What do you need? What materials do you need? What resources do you need? And does the site provide those for you? We'd like to know. Okay, we're towards the end of our session today, but we cannot close this without hearing from the head of the NGO and Civil Society Center, who will give his thoughts and a closing message and his final thoughts on our 3-day training. Please let us welcome Chris Morris. Chris?
Thank you, Roselle. Let me just rearrange my phone a little bit, so hopefully everybody can hear well. Thanks everybody for joining for the 3 days and giving me the opportunity to say a few words at the end. Unfortunately, I missed yesterday, and I'll come back to that. But I followed with a lot of interest day one, and also the more technical sessions today. And we're very pleased for the support that we've had from Central West and the interest in the event. Roselle, who's been the face of NGOC over the last 3 days, has done a great job putting this together, but there have been many helpers as well, and with certainly Ida, who initially pushed for this event, said there was interest and it would be valuable. Spent a lot of time with Roselle and Lainey putting designing the event and coming up with the three days, and we are happy that there has been good support of participants. I'm going to walk around a little bit because I have been having Wi-Fi challenges and I had to switch to my phone, and I now have to find some power to make sure that you don't lose me. And I am struggling with that. Right. So we have 14 countries. Bear with me as I plug it. We have 14 countries in Central West. We've had, on average, about between 20 and 25 participants for each day. And it shows the interest in the event, and a lot of individual participation from our anchors and the network, the CSO Cooperation Network in Central West. I was just looking through, and Lainey mentioned her personal interest, having spent 3 years up in the Caucasus. And certainly it's an area that I'm very fond of as well. I've never lived in Central West, but back when I first joined the NGO Civil Society Centre, when the NGO Civil Society Programme was of the annual meeting was in Azerbaijan, in Baku, and also the year before that in Astana, in Kazakhstan. I had the opportunity to visit a number of countries in the Southern Caucasus, and I was just counting how many of the countries I've actually visited, and it came to 6 out of the 14. But another 4 of those I've also worked in. We've got current activities in Azerbaijan, Armenia, Tajikistan. I've worked in. Afghanistan, we've got something ongoing with Sahid at the moment as well. And it's a very interesting, albeit challenging region with respect to civil society. It's great to see the work that's currently ongoing with MECRI in Uzbekistan, because when I think it was 2011, I first met MECRI there in Uzbekistan, and the BWA, the Business Women's Association, where we're having contracts now and they're getting involved in women's enterprises, and ADB is funding such activities now. At that time, I remember ADB had just closed down a component of a TA because there were no financing mechanisms to get money to civil society or NGOs within the country. So things do change over time, sometimes slower than expected. Other times we are surprised at the way that things going on in the world influence change. COVID-19, for example, whilst it's been a very challenging time for civil society, there's also been opportunities and a realization that in many countries, civil society do step up when there are challenges or disasters, and are very much involved with governments and citizens in providing our local services. With ADB, as we move to with our next phase of support with COVID-19, and the board is, I'm not sure whether the policy has been agreed yet, or it's and if not, it will be agreed in the next few days. It's been pushed to the board, a new policy on vaccines, because ADB is part of a network, a global network supporting the vaccines initiatives. And it's interesting, when I was reading some of the documents around that, in many developing countries, civil society organizations are the provide something like 60 to 70% of the vaccinations in countries. So one of the areas as we move forward to support this initiative, we would be interested in NGOC for you working throughout Central West. If you do hear of initiatives or are approached from civil society on the vaccine front, please do contact NGOC, because that is an area where ADB is, it's obviously new to us. Our health specialists are very much getting involved, and there could be certainly further potential for civil society engagement there. Roselle has also asked me to go through some of the thanks. Obviously, day one, I followed, as I said, in full, and the Lucine from the Child Development Foundation in Armenia presented very well. And also Georgi, who's done quite a little bit of work with us in NGO and Civil Society Center from the Institute of Development, Freedom for Information, and his work with the Open Government Partnership was very interesting and very relevant as well. That kicked off the workshop. As I say, yesterday, and it was unfortunate that I missed yesterday, and I will give you the reason. I was part of a facilitating a discussion with the advocacy watchdog NGO of ADB. That's the NGO Forum on ADB, which has a network throughout the region. It's not active in all of Central West. Some of the countries it is active in. For example, Kyrgyzstan, Georgia also it's quite active, but it doesn't have much reach at the moment in Central West. But ADB is in the process of reviewing its energy policy and also the safeguard policy statements. And there's a series of discussions and consultations that NGOC is supporting our sector colleagues in. Lainey is leading the work with the SPS. I've been coordinating the work on the energy policy review. And there was a consultation yesterday on climate change and what ADB is doing to align with the Paris Agreement. Very, very interesting, and there's a lot of things that ADB is doing with the commitment under OP3 of the Strategy 2030, but also with the recent agreement on the ADF, new concessionary lending and granting system, the Asia Development Fund. There's specific windows for working in gender, but also climate change and FCAS. And it was great to see Saeed present yesterday the work in Afghanistan on FCAS. And ADB is putting a lot of support into that area, recognizing that it differentiated approaches in the challenging and in fragile states or states where there are conflict areas or where there are disasters mean that we have to be more agile and have the right type of approaches. And that's the FCAS work. Again, NGOC is supporting the Sam Tamewa, who used to be country director in Afghanistan in Central West, is leading that work now in SDCC. Yeah, also yesterday, there was the presentations by in Armenia and Uzbekistan from Mekri and or Anushik and Mekri respectively, then Tatiana on the advocacy work in Tajikistan, which from the outputs of those discussions and what Roselle has just come from, there seems to be some very rich and useful information. So I congratulate everybody for participating in that. Today, the sessions are a little bit more technical, and thank you for Emma covering the staff instruction, civil society engagement, and Lainey reminding us or updating us on the continued work of how we measure civil society engagement in our projects through the SPRSS. And big congratulations to Lainey and the team that has got the corporate results framework, new indicator through, and we'll be starting the next year with a review of, for the first time from NGOC on that new corporate results framework. So that's exciting work for us, and it gives us recognition in the work that we do with civil society, and having the network throughout the resident missions and support from project officers, gender specialists, social specialists out in the resident missions who tend to do more work with civil society organizations is something that we certainly recognize very much in the NGOC, and ADB with its strategy 2030 is recognizing the importance of that as we continue not only to measure that better, to make sure that we are engaging appropriately, but also to improve the ways, continually to improve the ways that we do engage. We've heard, and we heard again today, the challenges of engaging, particularly with local CSOs or NGOs, and ADB's arduous contracting processes. They will continue to be a challenge, but the challenges that we must support local NGOs in to overcome, as they are an important partner on our projects. What else did you want me to go through, Roselle? I'm just seeing if there are other key things that NGOC is involved in that you may be interested in from your side. One of the things that and one of the sad things about this workshop is it is virtual, although we do see good participation from everyone. It does provide opportunities for different types of knowledge events. And I know as at the end of the workshop, then Roselle will be asking for feedback. We're particularly interested not only in feedback from the technical side, but also ideas about how we can use virtual platforms better. ADB's platforms are improving. We're improving in our use of them. So any ideas or requests? We don't, for example, this workshop has not been 9 to 5, 3 days in a row. We haven't all had to be in one place continually. We've had three sessions of an hour and a half, 2 hours, hour and a half. And NGOC, we're quite open to requests for these types of workshops from resignations connected with projects or the anchors themselves. If you want to come back together as a group with on any particular topics, then we're available for discussions on how we can do that. So whilst we miss the opportunity, obviously, to be with you intensely for a few days, and we hope that perhaps by the end of next year that we'll be traveling again and meeting colleagues. But please do make requests, think about opportunities of using virtual platforms more. Again, it's probably, I was really looking forward to 2021, where the annual meeting is going to be in Georgia. It's currently scheduled for Georgia at the beginning of May. The latest updates that we're having from that, ADB's Office of the Secretary is actually December at the moment, talking with the Ministry of Finance in Georgia, and we understand there will be a decision in January on whether the annual meeting will go ahead, possibly in a virtual format in May, or another option, it may be also postponed for later in the year, where there may be more chance of an in-person annual meeting taking place. We'll hear about that early next year, and certainly myself and Roselle, who lead the annual meeting work, will be in contact with through IDA and the resident missions in Central West for ideas about what to showcase on the annual meeting. We haven't, normally we go out this time of the year, but we're waiting to hear of whether it will be an in-person meeting or a virtual meeting before we reach out. But we will be doing that early next year, so would appreciate getting together again, probably virtually, and having a brainstorming on that and seeing what are the opportunities and what may be some of the challenges that we encounter with the annual meeting being in Georgia in Central West. So I think with that, emphasizing, as we are doing more virtual things, Glo gave a very, very brief introduction to the community site. It's very much a beta release. We do want it to be a site where people go and visit to pick up information that helps you do your job better or more easily. So we know it's not there yet, but we put out launched this beta version so that people can see it, play around with it, visit it a couple of times, tell us what you like about it, tell us what you don't like about it, tell us what you'd like to see on it, please, and do it in a candid way so that we may improve it. It is an internal site, so it's just for ADB staff and our consultants. So we hope that it's principally for the CSO anchors and those who are wanting to, project officers who are wanting to design components or pick up tools for engaging with civil society organizations, or to put in meaningful youth components into your projects. And we hope that it'll become a tool that is a go-to site to help you and your colleagues in your engagement work with civil society. So I think that's all I'd like to say at the moment. Congratulations for everybody who's participated. A big thanks again to Roselle and Ida, who have put a lot of effort into this. To all the speakers, those who are still online, Lainey and Emma. Also the back end of NGOC, Glo was supporting. You've seen Sam with her exercise, and also Kate and Amy have been involved on some of the administrative work supporting. So if I have missed anyone else from Central West, who've been great, your support's been gratefully appreciated. As we are coming up to the end of the year, I'm still based as Lainey is, and in fact the whole NGOC team, we're probably one of the only units which is still fully in Manila. A lot of international staff are working from home from across the region and the globe. NGOC is still including myself here in Manila. It is a big festive season, so things are starting to close down for the holidays. For those who are celebrating in your own culture, the end of the year, I wish you a happy celebration on behalf of NGO and Civil Society Centre. And in these challenging conditions with COVID-19, I wish you and your families continued health and safety. Hopefully, with the end of the tunnel in sight, with vaccines starting in some countries globally, hopefully they'll be out in the region sooner rather than later. But we do anticipate it, that the challenging situation is going to continue for foreseeable future. So please stay safe, enjoy the holiday season, and thank you very much for your participation in joining the workshop from NGO and Civil Society Centre. Thank you. Back to you, Roselle.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much, everyone. Before you sign out, please don't forget to click the link to the training evaluation form in our chat box. Your feedback are important to us. So bye, everyone. Keep safe and healthy.